At this point, I'm going to turn over the gavel to Regent Robinson for the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. Regent Robinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll go ahead and call the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee meeting to order here. We've got a few consent items, first of all, on our agenda, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 information items that we'd like to cover as well. So we're starting a little bit late, but I think we'll be fine with this. I wanted to go ahead and start first. No, we had a great discussion before. I thought it was well worth it. With the consent items, we'll go ahead and start with that. With the committee members here, are there any of the consent items that we would like to pull out for action? No. Hearing none, is it the will of the committee to move these consent items forward for a vote? Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Moving on to the information item A, the AMA update. I'd like to first of all thank Neil Moisey and also, sorry, I'm forgetting, Elizabeth, thank you, Elizabeth, for your help in putting together my agenda. Just so you realize, this is my agenda right here. So, and it's been very helpful to go through this in our committee meetings, and so thank you for your help with preparing this. Why don't you go ahead and, if you would, please introduce our presenter for the AMA update.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, members of the board. Our first information item today, and as you'll remember, our American Indian Minority Achievement. This board charged the system with bringing together a council from across the system representing students up through faculty and administrators to really look at our American Indian and minority achievement within the system. And our director of AMA, Brandy Foster, is here to give an update on a meeting that happened, a face-to-face meeting with that council, and to talk a little bit, I think, about direction from here on and communication with the board about that direction.
Thank you. Chair Robinson, members of the board, Commissioner Christian, as discussed at the Regents meeting in November, an advisory council was created to focus efforts in order to improve the ways in which we serve our American Indian communities. I'm happy to report that we have had our first face-to-face meeting, and we met with great representation from our campuses, the Office of Public Instruction, Tribal College, and the Commissioner's Office, including students. At that meeting, we reviewed data, the data that I often go over at these meetings and is available on our website, as well as identified new areas for further analysis. We had a rich discussion on current policies and practices, including looking at language. We looked at practices regarding admissions and application, how students identify themselves, and the tuition waiver. We came to, I think, a good understanding of where we want to go, which is essentially to improve the metrics, to change the numbers for enrollment, retention, persistence, graduation, and employment, both within our campuses as staff and faculty, but also for our students as they move forward. We used a consensus building exercise, which I'm excited about because it was an Indigenous methodology we used, led by Dr. Sweeney Winchief. And what we started with was the question, if we could do one thing to improve our service to American Indian students, what would it be? The council, through this process, identified 30 separate items, and we were able to select 6 as the top priorities. Those 6 items listed on the agenda, number 1, creating campus community for American Indian students. Number 2, increasing the number of American Indian employees at every level. 3, ensuring that staff, faculty, and administration are culturally responsive in working with American Indian students. 4, building relationships with tribal communities, including tribal colleges. Number 5, fostering mentoring relationships for students, as well as American Indian staff, faculty, and administrators. And number 6, clarifying and prioritizing the Montana University system's responsibilities under Indian Education for All. These were the 6 items that came to the forefront, and our next step now is to assign subcommittees to further detail each of these priorities. Our hope is to identify current practices as well as best practices under each area, and those best practices can be on our campuses currently or ones that we know about that happen in other states or in other countries that serve Indigenous populations. We want to clarify the desired outcomes with affiliated measurements under each of these areas, and eventually develop recommendations for policy and goals for your review, as well as campus-level strategies. We also will continue further discussions on the other issues that didn't make the cut, as well as potential opportunities for growth. So we've gone from having a very general discussion to now being more specific and looking at intentionally how can we move forward in a meaningful way. I anticipate that by May, we should have some preliminary recommendations for you, and hopefully some of the council members will be able to present at that meeting. So that's an update. Not too much detail, but I just wanted to ensure you that we're very excited about these conversations. It has been very nice to feel the support from leadership at the system levels, but also the campus levels. And we are looking forward to continued conversations.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? I did want to mention that I did participate in the meeting, literally a fly on the wall, because I could call in for the meeting. Couldn't make it there in person, and it was very exciting to hear the discussions going on within the room. I really did like how it was structured in order to bring the ideas out, and then to further focus it down to these 6 items and the process that you took to do that. Because I think if we can't select the specific items that there's buy-in on from this council, it really makes it hard to make progress on this. So I think these are really far-reaching items, all 6 of them. So I look forward to the next discussions. Do you know when the next meeting is anticipated for the council?
I think it will be the 3rd week of March. We're trying to wrangle some schedules. Initially, we were going to do the next meeting conference call, but everyone felt, or many people felt, that having a face-to-face conversation was just better. We have some students on our council and some folks who maybe aren't as outspoken, and so we feel that if we do face-to-face, we'll engage them more. We had the committee, we met for 4 hours, and in that 4 hours time, we talked about everything imaginable, performance-based funding and applications, and how do students identify, and how many students or how many FTE work in American Indian Student Service. We talked about a million different things, but we came up with these 6 items, and I just feel like the group is the right group, and we have the right communication in order to get some real meaningful results. So I think our next meeting will be the 3rd week in March. It's not been definitive yet. We're still waiting for some schedules. And then after that face-to-face meeting, that's when we'll separate out into subgroups, and it'll be a little bit easier for people to call in and have good conversations.
Well, if you would please thank the council members for us, for their work and for their continued work on this. We look forward to the recommendations that are going to come forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move to the next information item. Item B is tuition for non-resident veterans. And if Neil, if you could introduce our presenter today, thank you.
Certainly, Chairman Robinson, members of the board, we have 2 names listed here, but Ron Muffick, who is our Director of Student Affairs in the office is going to talk a little bit about the piece of federal legislation that was recently passed, the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act, and really what the implications are in terms of veteran students in Montana.
Thank you, Neil. Mr. Chair, members of the ARSA committee, members of the board. This update is related to, as Neil mentioned, non-resident veterans tuition, and specifically as it relates to some new federal requirements related to the non-resident veterans, with the idea of providing you some background for an action item in May. To kind of give you the background, as I mentioned, last year when Congress, they enacted some legislation to clean up some of the issues they were having with the Veterans Administrations and its health care problems, and they included some language in there related to veterans education benefits. And this was all included in Public Law 113-146, which is the Veterans Access, Choice, and Accountability Act, which we have come to call the Choice Act, and specifically Section 702 is the education piece. Basically, this is kind of federal government speak here. It requires the VA to disapprove programs of education if a school charges non-resident tuition and fees to all covered individuals who live in the state in which the public institution is located. It's effective July 1, and on the next slide, I'll tell you, covered individuals are basically the veterans who enroll within 3 years of discharge after serving 90 days or more. And these are Montgomery GI and post 9/11 GI Bill veterans. Their spouses and children, if they transfer their entitlement, and their surviving spouses and children under the Fry Scholarship. And once the student is enrolled, the individual remains covered as long as they are continuously enrolled at the same school. The concept here really is for recently discharged veterans and families, so they won't have to bear the costs of non-resident tuition, which the majority of our veterans are your recently discharged veterans covered under the post 9/11 GI Bill. It does not guarantee or require states to charge the in-state tuition. It doesn't guarantee it to all veterans under Chapter 33 or Chapter 30. For example, if you're active duty, you're not eligible. And the VA comes out and says, well, we can't compel you to change what you're charging these non-residents. We can't force you to do it, but we're going to disapprove the impacted programs. An impacted program means your school, really. We're not talking programs of study here. So it's a big stick when they say that. They're not compelling us to, but they're dangling it out there, and I'll get into some detail here about what kind of impact that will have on our system. So after all that kind of VA government speak, I thought I'd include a summary page here that just basically says that qualifying individuals, which are basically going to be your post 9/11 veterans or their dependents, if they reside in Montana, if they move here on August 1st and they want to go to school in the fall, they would be considered a resident. We wouldn't be able to impose any other residency requirements on them if we want to keep the VA funding. The VA funding, if we don't comply, it's about $15 million that we would lose. So there's a fiscal imperative there as well as a moral imperative to provide this to the veterans. This is kind of also a funding shift from the feds to the state. The changes from the public law in Section 702 will cause us to lose about $2.5 million in revenue and from tuition and yellow ribbon, regardless of whether we comply. So the choice is, we're going to lose $2.5 million if we comply, and we're going to lose $15 million if we don't comply. So it's kind of choose your poison here. And again, that's the shifting of funding. We talked a little bit about, or I've talked extensively about this. It's the Yellow Ribbon program where right now, under Yellow Ribbon, a non-resident veteran, if they're going to one of our institutions, the VA will pay the resident rate and half the non-resident difference, and then we would waive the other half. So we're losing that other half of that non-resident, if that makes sense. So what are our next steps? The whole kind of gist of this presentation is to just let you know where we're at and what we're doing, that we've got it covered. We don't have to comply until July 1st. I've been on a weekly webinar or conference call with the Veterans Administration every Friday at 10:30 in the morning to make sure that we as a state are complying. Pointed out with the help of some of our other VA officials in the state that we're only the university system here. The tribal schools are going to have to do their own compliance. Talk to the governor's office about that as well to make sure that they don't look at us as complying for everyone throughout the scope of the state. for the MUS and the community colleges, we have it covered. I've been working with our attorneys, Jessica Brubaker, our staff attorney, to make sure that we have policy language that's related to these requirements. We finalized that. We've submitted it to the VA since I put together this presentation. It's been submitted. The VA came back with a couple comments, and we resubmitted this morning, actually, to get their approval. The VA recommended that we get their approval first before we bring it to you, so that we're not having you as a board approve something that wouldn't be in compliance. So the plan is we'll get the VA to approve it. We'll then bring the policy language that's been approved by the VA to the board in May for an action item. And then the action item, assuming you guys approve it, we have until July 1 to get it in place. I'm in the process of developing a system-wide implementation work group that consists of registrars, admissions, veterans directors, financial aid, so that we have the scope of all the offices that may be impacted by this, and so that we can have a consistent application throughout the system, so that the veterans are getting the same information from various campuses. So bottom line, we'll bring this in May to you. We have it covered. We've got a few months to go. There's only 2 states so far that have been approved. Texas and Georgia are the only states that have been approved by the VA. Every state but 2 or 3 have indicated they plan on complying. The 2 or 3 that haven't indicated they're complying or intent to comply haven't come out and said, no, we're not going to comply. They've just haven't done anything. So we're thinking they're just kind of remiss and not up to speed. But working with the VA surprisingly has been very, geez, that sounds negative, but working with the VA has been surprisingly pretty easy in this process. And they've been very helpful and very responsive to emails and conversations, et cetera. So that's the end of my report. I stand for any questions. Thank you.
Regent Krause.
Thank you. So a question and then a comment. The question is, will they count as residents? Or is that what the policy will change will be? They'll pay, and that will, you know, we had this discussion long ago, and I think you know what I'm asking you, and if I'm not asking it correctly, will they count as residents? For
Mr. Chair,
tuition purposes and tuition waiver purposes and all those things.
Mr. Chair, Regent Krause, we aren't looking at making it a tuition waiver. It won't be a waiver. It will be an exception to the residency requirement. So they will be coded as a resident. And this is one of the things we need to work through when we work with the operational group. But we're looking at potentially, right now, they would be coded as a resident student during that time period for the purposes of their tuition charges.
Thank you.
Regent Tuss.
Ron, did we know that this was coming? Maybe I haven't paid attention to this, but were we advised that this was in the offing with the federal government?
Mr. Chair, and Regent Tuss, Chair Tuss in most cases, short answer is yes. We were aware this was coming. We'd heard there were a couple of different bills. There was one in the House, there was one in the Senate. They needed to reconcile some things. There'd been a lot of talk about this coming to fruition, and then they found the perfect vehicle to stick it in with the Choice Act when they were addressing all the long wait times for veterans in the VA. We've done quite a bit of analytics. I think what you're trying to get at is, did we know we were going to have a shortfall of a couple $1 million coming? We thought it would be more about 1.5 million because that's what we have for the yellow ribbon. But then they threw in the spouses and the children if they're the dependents that have the entitlement assigned to them, and that bumped up the impact to us by, we're projecting about $1 million.
Commissioner Christian.
Chair Tuss. Chair Robinson, part of the reason we knew what was coming is we had good conversation along the way with Senator Tester's office. He kind of kept us surprised of the various stages of this. It started and then it sort of stopped for a while, and we weren't sure what was going to happen with it. He also worked to try to sort of minimize the impact to the states as much as possible, but ultimately, you know, that is sort of what happened with this. It moved what once was federal funding to state funding. And for all that we talk about the impact on the students, it's sort of none The impact is more on that shift. But nonetheless, that shift has occurred and we will need to deal with it appropriately.
Regent Johnstone.
Chair Robinson, thank you. I had two questions. One, can you explain what it means to transfer the entitlement?
Certainly, Chair Robinson and Regent Johnstone. There's a provision in the post 9/11 GI Bill regulations that allows a veteran to be able to say, okay, I don't plan on going to school, but I can transfer that to one of my dependents, and then the dependent gets basically the same benefits that the veteran would have had himself or herself.
So that it would be a situation in which if the veteran chose not to take advantage of this, he or she could transfer it to one of their dependents or all of their dependents?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, one at a time would be the answer to that.
Okay. And then secondly, have we tried to do any projections of what we think the impact will be on enrollment? Do we see a significant increase in enrollment as a result of this?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, we haven't done any specific analytics on that. There's kind of two camps there. There's one saying, as Commissioner Christian said, that we've already been in a different way providing this similar benefit. Then there's the other camp that's saying, you know, if I'm getting out of the service and I'm tired of the commotion and I don't want to be in Los Angeles, I might move to Montana to take advantage of this. So it's a tough thing to model. It hasn't happened previously with any of the VA programs. And so it's kind of a wait and see. We could take a look at the first year or two and see how it goes. And remember, they have to enroll within 3 years of when they're discharged. So there's kind of a limited window there with the troop drawdowns now. We think it'll be over the next few years.
And just one last question. Do we intend to try to recruit these people to encourage them to come, or what, do we have a view on that?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, that was the recruitment of our veterans and attempting to draw more veterans into our system is part of our Veteran Success Initiative. So that has, you know, we got the $1 million from the general fund from the legislature and the governor last year, and a piece of that was for recruitment to try and grow our enrollment of veterans. So it's something that we're focused on. We developed our veterans website. All of our campuses have been their rating as far as veteran friendly has gone up. So it's something that we've been already focused on.
Thank you.
Regent Krause.
Yes, I didn't make, I don't think I made the comment, which is, sounds like exactly the same place you were going, which is we hope, I guess I hope that we will see increased enrollment from veterans and the ability to serve more veterans, and I would certainly welcome that opportunity, right? I just think, you remember, we're still recruiting non-traditional students, we're still recruiting, spending money recruiting students, we're still doing all those things, and increased enrollment, considered residents will still help us in that situation. So I admit that we lose $2.5 million of transfer payments from the federal government. That's a bad thing. But on the same side, we're here to educate the populace and perform a function. And it's, I think 37 states or something like that were already offering this kind of thing. It wasn't uncommon that this was offered in other states, and we might be a little bit late to the party. And I just want, think about it in a global setting, and were the service people sleeping in tents in Afghanistan? Were they sleeping in Montana? I think they were. So I welcome as many as want to come and just like we would go out and recruit other students.
Thank you, Regent Krause. Any other questions from the board? Yes, Ryan.
I wanted to follow up on Regent Krause's question about the classification in terms of classifying them as a resident student. I want to make sure that I understand. Are they classified as a resident student for tuition purposes only, or would they be classified as a resident student? I know we report resident versus non-resident students, and we use those metrics for different things. And I'm curious how this classification for tuition purposes would play out in terms of those other measurements.
Mr. Chair, Regent Williams, as I said, those are the kind of things we're going to discuss with the registrars and the admissions people and with the financial aid people. One of the directions we've looked at going is, I believe it's graduate assistants that are non-resident get a special coding to somehow figure out their tuition charges, and we're looking at that could be a potential model to follow. So that's kind of the approach we're looking at. We're going to work, of course, with Tyler Trevor on that to make sure that we have the data so that we've got these people separated out. They're not just thrown into a pool and we lose track of them. So that's part of it. If I might add, what we would be doing for the veterans as far as making them an exception to the residency requirements, there's already a precedence for the current military that are stationed in Montana. We already make that exception, so this is kind of dovetailing off that. So not something unheard of.
Thank you, Regent Williams. Regent Tuss.
I think we'll probably end up supporting this in May, is my guess. I think that we've got a pretty veterans-friendly group here. Board certainly appreciate the leadership that Regent Krause has brought to this table. But it's worth noting that we would raise a ruckus about this if it was probably any other program that there was this kind of a shift that we all of a sudden had to take responsibility for from the federal government. I just think it's worth noting that. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Tuss. I did want to clarify something, if you could, Ron. The 2.5 million reduction in the Yellow Ribbon program, would that include the loss in tuition for the waiver or not?
Mr. Chair, 2.5 million, it's 1.5 million in lost revenue from the Yellow Ribbon program, which means we're also waiving 1.5 million, or no, yeah, 1.5 million. The other million is, to get us up to the 2.5, is what we're projecting based on having a couple hundred non-resident students that are dependents that will be now eligible for in-state tuition. So that's how we get to the 2.5. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that answered my question perfectly. I wanted the breakout between the two, so that helps.
Okay.
Any other questions at all? All right. Ron, thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Let's move on to item C, the math pathways update. And Neil, if you could introduce our presenter, that would be helpful. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Chair Robinson, members of the board. You'll remember one of the outcomes of the Developmental Education Reform Task Force was really looking at the role of math and math curriculum in terms of student success and student retention and ultimately completion rates. And part of diving down into that and looking at the data is we really looked at what the structure of math courses were within the system and math requirements at both an institutional level and even getting down into some of the degrees. We're a complete College America state, and this has been a big push of CCA is to really look at the alignment of math with particular disciplinary areas and to try get a good alignment between math competencies within a discipline and then looking at curriculum to develop and deliver that. Part of, we're one of 6 states that Complete College America chose to go through a 2-year process, a math pathways process. We started that this last fall. Part of that is to bring together math faculty within the state to really ask some questions about what is the role of math requirements, math education within our curriculum, and how that affects student retention and completion, and ultimately, I guess, student success. We've put together a committee, and the chair of that committee, Professor Jim Herstein, UM math faculty, is here to give an update on progress for the math pathways, and where we're going within the next year and a bit as that process.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Math Pathways Task Force was just appointed this last fall. We've had about 3 phone conferences. We've had one face-to-face meeting where we hammered out our public statement, which is what we bring before you here. This is actually the rollout of our public statement. The Complete College America group, we attended a meeting of theirs in Dallas in the fall, and they are convinced that math is a big contributor to the dropout rates that we have in college, and they want the 6 states to look into it. So the commissioner appointed this task force with 2 of us from the flagships, and if you look at the list on the second page, we're from all over the state, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges. We do have a liaison with the Developmental Education Council because we recognize that the assignment into developmental education is an issue with getting into what we're calling a gateway course. A gateway course is a college math course that counts toward graduation. And I think we all have math requirements, and very often those gateway courses are the obstacle, or are one of the obstacles. And so in our meetings, we have, let me just say a word about the goals that we've set for ourselves. On the second page, about halfway down, the 1, 2, 3, 4, these are not necessarily in order of importance, although I do think number 1 is the most important. We do want to increase the success rate in college math courses that are required to graduate. This is an important obstacle. President Cruzado joined us on one of our phone meetings and gave us an excellent quote saying that not everyone who leaves the university leaves so because they weren't successful at math, but everybody who wasn't successful at math leaves the university. And that, I think that's true. So we're trying to increase that success rate. We are trying to improve the articulation between mathematics requirements and academic programs. Here, my favorite example is the course we call pre-calculus. We have a course that we call pre-calculus, and as you might imagine, it is the math that's necessary for calculus. There are many programs that have pre-calculus as the required course in their program, the only required math course in their program. And my question is, why would you require pre-calculus if your students weren't going to go on and take calculus, unless you have some reason why the skills of pre-calculus are necessary for your program? Certainly, any program that math, science, engineering, computer science requires calculus, and so those students are going to need a pre-calculus either in their work before they get to college or when they get to college, because they're going to go on and take calculus. But many programs require statistics, and statistics doesn't necessarily need calculus, so there are other pathways to courses. We have courses that are terminal courses. They're courses for liberal education or courses for elementary education. And so the various pathways lead to the various curricula that we have at the university, and we're looking into all of those pathways for success rates and what students do, and in particular, what happens when they fail. We want to see the relationship between failure in mathematics and college dropout. We think that there is an important relationship there, but we want our recommendations to be data-based, not based on hearsay. Every math teacher knows why their students aren't successful. It's either the previous experience, or they're not studying hard enough, or they're playing too much. I mean, we all know why students fail, right? But we want the relationships that we're recommending to be based on data. And so that's our third point there. We want to use data to support any system recommendations that we make, either with respect to placement, student support, whatever we plan to do. And finally, we want to strengthen the communication between the secondary schools and the colleges. We invited Deputy Superintendent Parman to our face-to-face meeting to talk about what they're doing in the secondary schools, to be sure that the students who come to college are ready for college math. We'd like them to be ready to pass a gateway course when they get there. Of course, we recognize that not everybody is. Often students may have had a long hiatus from mathematics when they get there, sometimes 10 or 15 years, and it may require some refresher. So we recognize that those needs are always going to be with us, but we do want to make sure that most of the students who come to us are ready for a gateway course when they get there. At the bottom, we've listed a few bulleted questions that just illustrate what we're going to do within each of these areas. We want to identify the problem we're going to solve. We want to know the evidence that it is a problem. That's our database again. If there are root causes to the problem, what are those? Is there any additional information we need? I will say the Commissioner's Office has been very helpful in getting us the data that we're looking at very carefully. We want to know who the stakeholders are as we make a solution, and we wanted to identify nationally any promising strategies for addressing these problems. I think we have a good task force to work on these problems, a couple years to do it, and we're on the ground working on it right now. And I would entertain any questions you might have.
I'll ask any of the committee members first if there's any questions that you have. I'm going to borrow a question from Regent Williams on our call, and I thought it was helpful for us to understand it too on our committee call earlier this week. How does the math pathways actually connect with Ed Ready? How do they overlap or complement one another?
That has come up. I would answer that by saying we'll see Ed Ready as a tool within the program. One of the things we're looking at is how our courses structured. Right now, our courses tend to be prerequisite courses. So if you come needing a developmental course, we require that you take that course first and then take the gateway course. That may not be the most efficient way to deal with the problem. It might be that a parallel course that dealt with what you need when you get there, where you can have some help available to bring you up to speed, might be available. Maybe a course that starts later in the semester, so that if you determine there's a problem, you don't have to wait until the next semester to get into the helpful course. And we see Ed Ready in that view, where you might get some just-in-time instruction where you say, gosh, here's something I'm a little rusty on from my high school algebra, and I would love to go back and review it, and Ed Ready could be the vehicle that produces that rather than a separate course. So I think there's a lot of options that we're looking at, and we want to look at the things that are available within the state already, but maybe suggest some new things that we might find nationally are going on in other places.
Thank you, Jim. The other thing that I remember hearing in a meeting shortly after you all were appointed is the discussion about the right math for that particular program. And that if you're not requiring the appropriate math to fit within that program, then you're kind of setting the student up to fail, or to at least to be focused on something that they don't need to.
Yeah,
So,
an excellent point. It's one of the things that we are very sensitive to. That is, we want math departments to communicate with program departments and be sure that what we're offering is what they need for their graduates. It doesn't, I tend to get irritated when people tell me that they want math to be the hurdle that keeps students out of their program. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be the obstacle, right? We want to teach them the math that they need. And And so I think it really does require better communication between math departments and other programs. And if a program needs statistics and needs a particular kind of statistics, the math department ought to be offering that, and not, it isn't our choice really, it's our client's choice. We recognize that when we're doing calculus and higher level math, that is our choice. I mean, those are our majors, and those are, you know, what we think they need to be professionals in the field. But, you know, the business school is who knows what statistics they need to be successful in the business program. And so we need a strong communication there to make sure that we're doing the right thing for that. And that's what we're trying to say with the articulation between the math courses and the programs that we serve. Most of our programs are our clients. We're a service department for most programs. And so it's kind of odd maybe that a course that's required by everybody is a service course. But I think math departments have to realize that we are providing the mathematics that these people need for their careers.
Thank you. This has been illuminating to me too, because I thought everybody loved math. So it's just where it was.
I think that too.
Regent Williams?
I just want to make a comment. I really appreciate how using this project, we're really taking a student success-driven approach to mathematics. And there are so many things that you take as a student that sometimes feel like hurdles and don't always feel like they add as much value as you would like to your education. And I think this focus really brings that back home. It gives you the tools you need to be successful in your major. It gives you the tools you need to be successful in your career. And I just really appreciate that focus and the work that you're doing on that. I think it's really great.
Thanks a lot.
Great. Yes, Deputy Commissioner Moisey.
Chair Robinson, members of the board, another thing I'd like to kind of add to the question about Ed Ready and how that ties in with really what we're doing is a big part of what we're hearing from K through 12 is what is it that you guys are looking for in terms of preparing students for math. And as we look traditionally, going back probably 10, 15 years ago, most of the degree programs required college algebra, whether or not that was appropriate for the appropriate degree program, and certainly those in the STEM fields required stats. But about a year ago, we did looked at all the requirements across the university system, across all the different campuses, and actually found that the majority of degrees require the stats sequence. So and ultimately ending up in stats 216. Which kind of was an aha moment in some sense for thinking about how we are preparing students going into that. We started looking at our developmental education curriculum that was really focused on getting students through college algebra, not getting them into necessarily statistics. And then as we talk with our friends in K through 12, they're really asking about what do we need to do to prepare students to be college ready to go into math courses. And this is a really a significant conversation with them, because we're talking about multiple ways of preparation and not just the traditional one. So it's been a good way to address all those things. EdReady is a good tool that's being developed and used in a series of pilots and other studies across the state of both with K through 12 and also in higher ed. And it is a good tool, I think, that helps in that transition, helps in that communication. So ultimately, we want to be able to talk about the specific pathways in math, depending on the discipline and the degree, look at how we prepare students for that, look at how we structure our remedial and developmental education in that way, and look at how we prepare students in high school in the math courses for those different pathways. So it's a good project that really encompasses that whole range of interests and issues and efforts that we do in the system.
Great, thank you, Neil. Are there any other comments or questions from the campuses at all? If there's none, then thank you, Jim, for your work, and please pass along our appreciation to the task force members for their continued work on this.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That brings us to item D, information item on notification level 1 approvals. Neil, if you would introduce this first, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Robinson, members of the board. The item D, notification on level 1 approvals. These are notifications from the campuses in terms of the first step in terminations, putting programs into moratorium, adding campus-level certificates of 29 credits or less. Again, this is informing the board about those. If you look at the memorandum, those are the first things on the list. And then the second items in there are the level 1 academic proposals and changes. These, again, I do this at every meeting, but again, these go through extensive internal review processes on each of the campuses, come to our office and go through a process with the chief academic officers in the system. And these are coming to you as informational. These are approved in the commissioner's office. The only change I want to, mention is on the second page under University of Montana, under level 1 items, there's been a withdrawal of the top item. It's number 1008, the middle number there, and that is to offer an electronics technology certificate. That actually was titled incorrectly, but that's a program that they withdrew the approval for, and they want to change a little bit about that program, and we'll come back at a later date. But other than that, everything else stands. If there's any questions specifically about any of these, we can certainly address those.
Yes, Regent Williams.
And I actually spoke with Deputy Commissioner Moisey about this, but I think it's an important topic that when we're discussing terminating programs, that we talk about how the students who are in those programs are sort of transitioned out of those programs and how they're given their options. So I was hoping that we could just maybe get a brief, basically tell everyone what you kind of mentioned to me and how when we terminate a program, how those students are transitioned.
Certainly, Regent Williams and members of the board, your question came up around a specific program at Helena College, and we actually have the chief academic officer here if you need a little bit more information on that. I think Denise Runge is still here. There we are in the back, and I asked her specifically about this. So typically when a campus identifies a program for termination, it's a two-step process, and really what it is trying to do is to take a good look at enrollment in the program and what the issues are and whether or not those are obstacles that the campus can and wants to address. And it's a two-step process going through termination, the first one, and we have a form here and a process they go to, but it's really to inform students about what the options are. So certainly if you, at the beginning of the academic year, choose to terminate a program due to low enrollment or difficulty in terms of getting faculty or a variety of other reasons, you need to give students options to finish up. And in the case that you asked about, there were only, I think, 4 students in the program. They were given the option to complete the program at Helena College or to transfer to one of 2 other programs in the state, one at Montana Tech and one at University of Montana. I believe 3 of the students chose to transfer to those other programs, and 1 student chose to stay in the program and is scheduled to graduate this spring. So typically what happens is there needs to be a plan put together on the campus to get those students through the program, but at the same time, not letting any more students in. And then the second part of the process is to then notify all the high schools that these programs are no longer bringing students in, and to update catalogs and those kinds of things. So that's generally the process, and you see both in this memo the first step and the second step for some of these. So it's part of an ongoing process that happens on a campus of evaluating academic programs, whether they're appropriate, and looking at enrollments, and that a lot of that comes out of the program review process that the board looks at every November. So hopefully that answered your question.
Great, thank you. And from the committee members or board members, any other questions regarding these items? The notification or the level 1 approvals? All right, well, thank you very much. Let's move on to item E, the level 2 memorandum, which we will see on our agenda in May. Neil, could you discuss these level 2 items?
Certainly, Chair Robinson, members of the board. Level 2 academic proposals are typically changes in academic programs, new programs, research centers, so on and so forth. And these are academic changes that generally have a higher cost and certainly have impacts on both other programs in a campus and other campuses across the state. These go through the same internal review processes on the campus, come to the chief academic officers. They come to this board as informational at one meeting, and then they come back as action or on a consent agenda at a subsequent meeting. You'll look at the level 2 items that are here as informational. These ones are coming primarily from 3 campuses: Montana State, University Bozeman, University of Montana Missoula, and University of Montana Western. These, again, go through a call and a discussion with the chief academic officers, looking at all sorts of issues in terms of duplication, collaboration, cooperation, competition, and those sorts of things. So these come to you out of that group as agreement with these moving forward. There's a whole, quite a few of them in here. I would like, if I could be indulged, to ask Dean Melland from MSU Nursing to talk about a particular one here, which is it's the second one under MSU Bozeman, request for authorization to offer an associate's degree for registered nurses to masters. And this is really preparation for nurses to be in leadership roles. And this came up as a question in the ARSA call, and I asked her if she would come in and talk a little bit about this. We heard this morning in the meeting with Helena, the Helena group, about the healthcare industry. It's one of the biggest areas in terms of graduates in the Montana university system. It's an area where there's a shortage. And this is a very innovative and I think exciting approach to providing opportunities for nurses to advance in their field while they're working and prepare them in a leadership role. Dean Melland.
Thank you. Delighted to talk about our proposal. It is a proposal that we call the advancing nurses that have an associate degree already directly to a master's degree. And this came about really as a result of us responding to national recommendations from a variety of studies that have been done. Probably the most significant landmark study was done about 4 years ago by the Institute of Medicine that recommends really strongly that nurses be given the advantage of gaining higher levels of education, whether it be at the baccalaureate or master's level. This proposal focuses on the master's level, and that those opportunities be seamless, that they be as smooth and provide as opportune transition as possible. Also, that these nurses be educated to be highly skilled leaders. We have an incredibly complex healthcare system, as we all know, as we've tried to maneuver it probably. And it's been shown that nurses who really understand leadership, and especially leadership at the bedside, understand about quality, how to improve patient outcomes, that significant our healthcare system can be much more effective, and ultimately we can all benefit from that type of care as consumers. So this program is designed to help nurses to progress from that associate degree level to the master's degree level directly through that. And the way it works is that these would be registered nurses who have an associate degree. We assume they would be primarily nurses who have graduated from our associate degree programs here in Montana. They would need at least 2 years of experience, but we really anticipate that they will have more than that, because they will need to demonstrate that they're not the typical nurse, that they have really already gone above and beyond what it takes to be a quality nurse. They've demonstrated a strong commitment to leadership, to going the extra mile, to achievements in their profession, to advancing their education. We have a pretty rigorous matrix developed that we will evaluate their resume and what they've done. So we're really looking at the exceptional nurse that would be admitted to this program. Minimum of 2 years experience. They enter the program then and spend 1 year completing nursing content that they did not get in their associate degree program. Let me back up for a minute. As they are admitted at that time provisionally to the graduate program at MSU. Our graduate program has worked very closely with us with that. So they're admitted provisionally to the graduate school. They complete this year of nursing transition courses, as well as the Core 2.0 courses, if they've not already had Core 2.0. And if they are successful with a 3.0 or above GPA, matriculate then into our existing Master's Clinical Nurse Leader program that's been in existence for many years. That program does prepare that nurse to be the leader at the bedside, like I described, that who understands quality and leadership and policy and many of those concepts that are so important for that leader. So to kind of go back to the beginning, a nurse who could possibly do this, the amount of time it could take is someone coming out of high school would become an associate degree nurse. That takes 3 years, 3-year curriculum with our model curriculum, needs to work a minimum of 2 years, so that's 5 years. They come back and they spend a year taking these transition courses, that's year number 6, and then that clinical nurse leader master's curriculum is a 2.5-year sequence. So they would have been in school 8.5 years. But the actual sequence from the time they enter our program is that 1 year of transition and then into the 2.5-year master's CNL curriculum. We believe that this very much meets the land-grant mission or fulfills the land-grant mission of MSU, and that it's really providing that access to an education, that master's degree for these exceptional nurses. And before I finish, I want to just give you an example. This is a true example of a nurse up in Kalispell who heard about this program that we've been working on for a couple years, and she's very interested. Her name is Roxanne. She's a registered nurse who's worked in the cardiac catheterization electrophysiology lab at Kalispell Regional Healthcare for 10 years. She holds an associate degree in nursing. She is board certified as a cardiac vascular nurse through the American Nurses Credentialing Center and is a member of the Institute for Healthcare Improvement Organization. In the past 2 years, she has maintained her certification through attendance at Heart Rhythm Society national conferences. She serves on the Kalispell Regional Health Center's Safety Committee and the hospital's Sedation Analgesia Council. From the moment she heard about the possibility of this program, she decided she wanted to enroll in it. She applied for and won a $5,000 Educational Advancement Award from the Kalispell Regional Healthcare Foundation and is currently taking Core 2.0 courses with the hope that this option will be available for her. This is the exceptional nurse. This is a unique avenue that is a different avenue than is offered by our 7 other programs in the state who offer an associate degree to a baccalaureate. And this is a different nurse who's already achieved significantly in her career. And this is the type that I anticipate we will be admitting.
Thank you very much. Regent Tuss.
I'm absolutely intrigued by this proposal.
Great.
I think you were on the phone call when we talked about it. I think it's incredibly innovative. Would you talk just a little bit more about the market for these folks? I just want to be very clear that the marketplace is driving this decision and that the demand really is there for these folks that opt to do this.
Yes, well, I mean, we do have a clinical nurse leader program now so these nurses will come out with the degree that we're already offering, that we've been offering for, I don't know, 10 or 15, I think like 15 years or so. And it is somewhat of a new role. I just came from a national conference where nurse executives were talking about these clinical nurse leaders where they're not the administrator who spends their time hiring and evaluating nurses and doing that. Rather, the big issue right now in healthcare is so much on quality. We have such a concern about patient outcomes, and these nurses understand quality. They understand how to lead in this, to be patient care navigator. You've probably heard that term a lot, to help people navigate the system. So the actual name of the positions varies from hospital to hospital. Sometimes it's a quality improvement role, sometimes it's, I mean, it may vary, but yes, and it's growing significantly. The Affordable Care Act is definitely driving this somewhat. Demographics with the huge glut of baby boomers needing more care and needing help with our system that, you know, I as a nurse can hardly manage it, let alone somebody who doesn't understand healthcare. So yeah, definitely. VA especially has come out very strongly in support of the clinical nurse leader. And as I say, this is a program that we've been doing for quite some time.
Any other questions or comments?
Just generally about, I'm sorry, excuse me, not with respect
No,
to
go
this.
right ahead.
Thank you. Okay.
Pardon?
I had just a general question or comment about the larger level 2 memorandum, so
Oh, okay.
nothing on this.
Yeah, if there's no other questions for the dean, thank you very much
Thank you.
for coming and speaking with us. And
Thank you.
And I will just mention too, this is helpful. I know we can't have someone to speak on every one of these, but I think it is helpful at least to give the board an idea of some of these, to have someone come and speak like that. So thank you. Regent Johnstone?
Yeah, just, I guess this isn't so much a question as perhaps an observation and maybe a concern. You know, and I haven't done any studies, so this is an impressionistic, but my impression is that we authorize more programs than we terminate. And, you know, I look at our enrollment over the last 10 years, and it's essentially flat. I think it's less than 1% annual increase. And it just seems to me that I guess my concern is, are we adequately looking at a system-wide level at programs that perhaps should be eliminated or reduced? Because I fear that as we keep adding them and our enrollment stays flat, that there's a real risk that we're going to substantially dilute quality. And the numbers, at least that I'm looking at, seem to be incongruous. Essentially no growth and I'm looking at the four-year universities, which is where most of the changes are occurring. Virtually no growth in enrollment, and my guess is substantial growth in number of programs. So that's my concern. I don't have an answer, I just am raising it.
Yes, Neil, thank you.
Regent Johnston and Chair and members of the board, it is an interesting observation to look at certainly if we keep a flat number of programs that we seem to approve, or you approve more than we put into termination or moratorium or eliminate. And I guess you know, in a general sense, that's probably true. You know, what I find in my disciplinary area is that the work and the requirements are becoming much more specialized, and this, you know, this nursing program is a good example of that, and we need to prepare students much more to meet those demands in the workplace, and not that necessarily explains the whole difference of that, but as you look down at these lists, I mean, most of these degree programs are fairly specialized relative to a much more traditional disciplinary area, and I just, you know, I think the marketplace in some sense demands that. I know, working with the governor's Main Street Montana project, and I'm working with one of the key industry networks, the Innovation and Technology. You know, they're not just talking about computer programmers, they're talking about coders, they're talking about people who do large data analytics, and you know, those all take a different kind of preparation and a degree and an emphasis. And so, you know, that might be a part of it also. I don't know if that really gets at your sort of bigger 30,000-foot question or not, but
Well,
that's
each of the programs, excuse me, I mean, on their own, I look at them and I say, gee, this looks terrific. The case has been made, and so you approve them. My concern is the larger global issue. I'm not challenging the validity or the need for any of the programs. I'm looking at the numbers, and that's where I'm having some challenges. Excuse me.
Thank you. Any other comments regarding Regent Johnstone's question, or any comments in general regarding this item?
I have a general question.
Yes, Regent Albrecht.
I'm curious, when these are proposed, is there also a proposed marketing plan as to how they're going to attract students to the particular area?
Regent Albrecht and Chair and members of the committee, yes, part of the set of questions that we ask on the level 2s is really a projection of student demand, and also really looking at, are there jobs available for students? And, a lot of this is projections, obviously, but again, there are data sources that a lot of programs look at. Are there other similar programs in the state or surrounding states, and that kind of thing. So there is addressing those. And if you look at the set of questions, the curricular questions that are part of what is submitted, it can be anything from looking at data, looking at employment trends. The proposal on the nursing contains a whole lot of letters from the Hospital Association and a variety of other potential employers that really talk about what the need of this program is. So it is a big piece of we certainly don't want to approve programs that really there isn't a market demand for, or very few students will come into those programs.
And thank you. And actually, my concern is a little bit different in that, and I see that there's a market, and I read through that, but my concern is then are we following through to ensure that those folks, say the hospitals, et cetera, are aware that now we offer this, and to ensure that we are marketing that to draw them in. It's not build it and we expect they'll come because the market's out there.
And Regent Albrecht, members of the board, I guess, on a campus, certainly those programs are reviewed on a cyclical basis. We ask that the programs come to the board every 7 years. Part of that is really looking at enrollments and also looking at employment trends and that kind of thing. I would hope, and I guess I'm not answering your question specifically, but I would hope certainly that whoever is the director of these programs is getting out and interacting subsequently to getting those letters from the employers and from those supporting the programs. Everybody wants to have their program kind of meet what they projected and to be successful. So, in terms of what's here, the assumption is that they will follow up on that.
Thanks.
Any other comments? Seeing none, that is our last item for the Academic Research and Student Affairs Committee. And at this point, we will adjourn the committee and turn the gavel back to you, Regent Tuss.
Thank you, Regent Robinson. We will now call for public comment. This is the time for public comment. We will be doing this again, I believe, tomorrow, but we do have time right now for public comment. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, the board will stand at recess until, I believe, 8:15 tomorrow morning. 8:15, Dean? 7 o'clock breakfast here. The meeting begins at 8:15. Thank you, Dean. We stand in recess.